Billionaire CEO pays off her debt for a baby, but he falls in love and refuses to let her go. Before we dive into today's heart-gripping story, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Valentino Stories, where love, betrayal, and redemption unfold like never before. Now, let's begin. She signed the papers to save her family, never knowing that the billionaire who offered her a lifeline wanted something far more than just a deal. And when he fell in love, walking away was no longer an option. Where desperation meets destiny. The night was heavy with rain, the kind that made even the city lights blur into silver streaks. In the small apartment above Marlowe Street Pharmacy, Naomi Carter sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills and a silence that pressed down like grief. Her mother's medical treatments had drained everything. The bank had taken the car. The landlord had already given the final notice. Naomi was 27, intelligent, resilient, and beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention but earned it quietly. Yet tonight, her eyes held exhaustion instead of dreams. She picked up her phone again, staring at the message she'd been avoiding all day. From Brielle, her best friend text, "Naomi, please. I know it sounds insane, but at least talk to him. You have nothing to lose." Naomi exhaled shakily. She didn't want charity. She didn't want pity. But nothing to lose wasn't just a saying anymore, it was her reality. She typed a reluctant reply. "Fine. Tell him I'll meet him. Tomorrow." The next afternoon, she walked into the Marcellus Tower, a 70-story glass monument piercing the Manhattan skyline. Everything about it screamed wealth, the kind of wealth she couldn't even imagine. The receptionist barely looked up as Naomi introduced herself. "Mr. Lancaster is expecting you," the woman said crisply. Naomi swallowed hard. "Mr. Lancaster." The man Brielle said could solve everything. The billionaire CEO who could erase her debt with a signature. When the elevator doors opened on the 59th floor, Naomi stepped into a world of steel and silence. His office was massive, framed by windows that made the city look small. And there he was, Ethan Lancaster. Tall. Composed. The kind of man who didn't have to speak to command a room. His suit was black, his eyes a striking gray-blue, and his presence, unsettling. He looked up from his laptop, assessing her like a puzzle. "Miss Carter," he said. "You're punctual. That's good." Naomi forced a polite nod. "You said you could help me." He leaned back, studying her. "Your debt, $214,000. You've been trying to pay it off for almost 4 years. You've taken 2 side jobs. Your mother's hospital still calls every week." Naomi froze. "You looked into me?" "I don't make offers to strangers," he replied simply. Her voice trembled. "What do you want in return?" Ethan stood, walked to the window, and clasped his hands behind his back. "A child." Naomi blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He turned slowly, eyes locked on hers. "I want an heir. I don't have time for relationships or media scandals. I need someone discreet. Someone who understands an agreement is an agreement." The air left her lungs. "You're asking me to have your baby?" "Yes," he said calmly. "In exchange, I'll pay your debt in full and provide financial security for your mother's care. You'll be free in every sense, once the child is born." Naomi's hands trembled. "This is insane." "Perhaps," he said quietly. "But so is losing everything you love because of money." The words hit too close to home. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "I don't need affection. I need honesty. And a decision." Naomi felt the walls closing in. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. She looked at the contract on the desk. Legal, binding, terrifying. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because," he said, almost too softly, "you're the only one who didn't ask me for something I wasn't offering." For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes, not power but loneliness. She didn't answer that day. She couldn't. But when the hospital called that night saying her mother's condition had worsened, Naomi found herself standing outside his building again, contract in hand, heartbreaking. When she walked into his office, he didn't look surprised. "Miss Carter," Ethan said, "have you decided?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." He extended his hand. "Then let's make this official." Her fingers trembled as she signed her name, and sealed the beginning of a story neither of them could control. Would you ever agree to such a deal, if it meant saving your family? Tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were Naomi. Where the deal begins, and hearts start to betray logic. The move into Ethan Lancaster's penthouse felt less like relocation and more like crossing dimensions. Naomi stood in the center of the massive living space, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan skyline, soft jazz humming from hidden speakers, a grand piano gleaming in the corner like it belonged in another world. "Your room is down the hall," Ethan said, voice calm and businesslike. "Third door on the right. Everything you'll need has been arranged." Naomi followed his direction, trying not to gawk at the hand-painted walls and the marble floors that seemed too pristine to step on. When she entered her room, she froze. It wasn't just luxurious, it was personal. The books on the shelf were titles she'd once mentioned loving during their brief calls. A vase of lilies, her mother's favorite flower, sat near the window. She turned, startled, when Ethan's voice came from behind her. "I had my assistant prepare it based on your preferences." She swallowed. "You know a lot about me." He met her gaze evenly. "I prefer not to walk into contracts blind." "It's not a contract anymore," she murmured before she could stop herself. "It's my life." Something flickered in his expression. Guilt? Empathy? She couldn't tell. That first week passed like an uneasy dream. A nurse visited daily for Naomi's health checks. Lawyers dropped in for confidentiality briefings. Every part of her existence was managed, structured, controlled. But Ethan was different than she expected. He wasn't cruel or cold. Just contained. He worked long hours in his home office, speaking in low tones over encrypted calls, his jaw tight, his movements precise. But at night, she sometimes saw him sitting alone by the piano, fingers brushing the keys without playing. One evening, she found the courage to ask, "Why do you never play?" He looked up from his glass of whiskey. "Because some things are better left silent." "You mean painful," she said softly. He studied her, as if she'd walked straight into a place he'd locked long ago. "Both," he finally said. That was the first time Naomi saw the man beneath the armor. Not the billionaire, not the strategist, but a lonely soul wrapped in expectation. As the days unfolded, the rhythm of their strange coexistence shifted. Breakfasts turned from polite silence to brief conversations. Lunches became shared. And once, when Naomi had a dizzy spell during a medical check, Ethan actually carried her to the couch himself, his composure breaking for the first time. "You should have called me," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. "I didn't want to bother you," she said weakly. He knelt beside her, eyes full of something she hadn't seen before, fear. "Naomi, if anything happens to you," he stopped, exhaled shakily. "I need you to be careful." That night, she couldn't sleep. Every word of his echoed in her chest. "I need you." She knew he didn't mean it the way she wished. But sometimes, wanting to believe was stronger than truth. Weeks turned into months. Naomi began to notice the small things, the way Ethan always made sure her chair was pulled out before meals, the extra blanket that appeared on the couch whenever she fell asleep there, the fact that he never let anyone speak to her with even a hint of disrespect. He was quiet protection wrapped in intimidation. Yet every boundary he built seemed to erode with time. One evening, during a power outage, Naomi found herself lighting candles in the kitchen. Ethan appeared, holding a flashlight. "No electricity, no Wi-Fi," she joked. "I guess billionaires aren't immune to blackouts." He chuckled, a rare low sound that warmed the air. "We can survive one night without control." "Can you?" she teased. He smiled. "I'm learning." The moment hung between them, candlelight soft against his jaw, her eyes reflecting gold. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was charged. She stepped closer. "Ethan." He swallowed. "Naomi." But then he stepped back, the air breaking like glass. "You should rest." And just like that, the walls went up again. A few nights later, Naomi overheard him on a call. His voice was sharp, agitated. "I told you, the contract is binding. I don't care what the board thinks. This is my decision." She froze behind the door. The board. The company. Her. Was she a deal even now? A transaction with consequences she didn't understand? That night, she wrote a note she never sent. You said this was about a baby. But you look at me like I'm something you can't name. And I don't know what's more dangerous, wanting to believe you feel the same, or knowing I might be wrong. Days later, she asked him quietly over breakfast, what will happen after the baby? He hesitated. You'll be taken care of. That's not what I asked. He looked up, eyes dark. You'll be free. Naomi smiled faintly, though it hurt. And you? He didn't answer. He just stared at her, a man realizing that freedom was the last thing he actually wanted. That night, as Manhattan glittered outside their window, Naomi stood by the balcony, lost in thought. Ethan joined her silently, the wind lifting his tie, the air heavy with everything they hadn't said. Naomi, he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, I don't know when it happened, but you've become more than I intended. Her breath caught. Ethan. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to still call it restraint. This was supposed to be a transaction, he said, his voice breaking slightly. But now, I'm the one who can't walk away. Naomi turned to face him, tears glinting in her eyes. Then don't. But before either of them could bridge the distance, his phone rang, harsh, sharp, intrusive. He looked at the screen, and his entire expression changed. Duty. Power. Control. Excuse me, he said, stepping away. The moment shattered like thin glass. When the door closed behind him, Naomi felt her heart collapse under the weight of what she'd seen. It wasn't rejection, it was fear. Fear of breaking his world for something as fragile as love. But what she didn't know was that Ethan wasn't taking a call. He was in his office, staring at the wall, fighting every instinct not to go back to her. For the first time in years, business could wait. But love couldn't. Do you think love can grow from something built on a deal? If you were Naomi, would you trust Ethan's heart, or run before it breaks yours? Tell us what you'd do in the comments below. The first time Ethan saw Naomi's ultrasound picture, he froze. The doctor smiled gently, pointing at the tiny flicker on the screen. That's the heartbeat. Naomi's hand trembled as she held the printout. Her eyes softened in wonder. For a moment, the sterile clinic melted into warmth. But Ethan didn't move. His gaze fixed on that flicker, life fragile and real, and something inside him cracked open. On the ride home, Naomi spoke softly. It's strange, isn't it? Knowing something so small can change everything. Ethan didn't answer. His knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. She glanced at him. You're quiet. He exhaled slowly. It's just complicated. What is? Becoming a father again. The word again hung in the air like a ghost. Naomi looked at him, stunned. You mean? But he only said, not today, Naomi. That night, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at an old photo hidden in a drawer, a woman smiling by the sea, holding a small boy with the same dark hair and curious eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. The woman was his late wife, Isabel. The boy, his son, Liam. Both gone in a car accident 3 years ago. He'd never told Naomi. He couldn't. Because the day he buried them, Ethan swore he'd never love again. And yet, here he was. Wanting, feeling, breaking that vow one heartbeat at a time. Naomi noticed the change. He started avoiding her eyes. He came home later. Sometimes she'd find him standing outside the nursery they'd begun setting up, his face unreadable. One evening, she couldn't take the silence anymore. She found him at the piano, the lights dim, a half-empty glass beside him. Ethan, she whispered, what are you afraid of? He didn't look up. You shouldn't ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to. Try me. He turned slowly, his expression hard but his eyes shattered. I had a son once, he said, voice breaking. He died. So did his mother. And since that day, every time I close my eyes, I see the crash, the fire, the silence afterward. Naomi's heart twisted. Oh, Ethan. I thought I could buy control, he said bitterly. Buy purpose. Even buy peace. That's why I started this. A child, without love. No attachment. Just continuation. No pain. Tears blurred Naomi's vision. But that's not life. That's surviving. He looked up sharply, angry at her truth, and at himself for knowing she was right. "What if I can't do this?" he whispered. "What if I hurt you too?" She took a step closer. "Then let me choose that risk." He closed his eyes, trembling. For a long moment, the only sound was the storm outside. Then, finally, he reached for her hand. It was the smallest touch, but it felt like forgiveness. Days passed, and something changed. They didn't talk about love. They didn't need to. It lived quietly between them, in the way he made sure she ate, in the way she waited up for him, in the soft glances that lingered a little too long. One morning, Naomi found Ethan asleep on the couch, a book open on his chest, a parenting guide. She smiled faintly, touched his hand, and whispered, "You're going to be a great father." He stirred, murmuring in half-sleep, "Not without you." Her heart skipped. Maybe he didn't mean it consciously. Maybe it was just words. But for Naomi, it was enough. Weeks later, the illusion of peace broke. Ethan's company was in turmoil. The press had caught wind of his surrogate deal. Headlines screamed across the media. Billionaire CEO buys motherhood. Who is Naomi Blake, the woman behind Lancaster's baby? Cameras crowded the entrance of his building. Naomi couldn't step outside without flashes blinding her. One night, she confronted him. "They're calling me a gold digger, Ethan. They say I'm using you." He stood at the window, jaw tight. "I'll handle it." "Handle it how? By hiding me? Pretending I don't exist?" He turned sharply. "You think I'm ashamed of you? Then say it," she cried. "Say I'm not just part of some deal." His silence was answer enough. Naomi's chest ached. "You can control your company, your image, but not me. Not what I feel." She turned to leave, tears falling freely. He took a step forward, desperate. "Naomi, please." She paused, trembling. "I can't stay if you won't fight for me." And she left. For the next 2 days, Ethan was a ghost. He couldn't eat. Couldn't work. Every room in that penthouse reminded him of her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she always looked at him like he was more than his mistakes. Finally, he made a choice. He called a press conference. Cameras rolled. Reporters shouted. Ethan stood at the podium, unflinching. "The woman you've been talking about is Naomi Blake. She is the mother of my child, and the woman I love. I will not apologize for that." The room fell silent. In that single moment, he risked everything, his company, his empire, his carefully constructed world, for truth. When Naomi saw the broadcast, she cried. Not because of the scandal, but because he had finally chosen her. That night, when he came home, she didn't hesitate. She ran into his arms, the tears and laughter mixing between them. He held her tightly, whispering, "No more contracts. No more conditions. Just us." She smiled through tears. "And the baby." He chuckled softly. "Our baby." And for the first time in years, Ethan Lancaster, the man who built walls taller than skyscrapers, finally felt free. Do you believe love can truly heal a broken heart, even one shattered by the past? If you were Naomi, would you have stayed, or walked away until he chose you publicly? Tell us what you would do in the comments below. Backhand index pointing down. When love is tested by life itself. The night it happened, the city was asleep under a curtain of cold rain. Naomi had been restless all day. Her back ached, her head throbbed, and something in her body whispered not right. Ethan had just returned from a meeting, exhausted but smiling. "You should be in bed," he murmured, brushing rain off his shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, trying to smile. "The baby's kicking more tonight." He smiled, touched her belly, and froze. Something was wrong. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. "Naomi." I think something's happening," she whispered, wincing in pain. And in an instant, the world turned to chaos. Ethan barely remembered the drive to the hospital. The rain was so heavy it blurred the road, but he didn't stop. Not once. Naomi's hand clutched his tightly, her nails digging into his skin as waves of pain came and went. "Stay with me," he kept whispering. "Stay with me, Naomi." When they reached the ER, doctors rushed her in. Ethan wasn't allowed past the double doors. He stood there, soaked, shaking, staring through the small glass window as they surrounded her. He'd faced boardrooms filled with sharks, political wars, lawsuits, but nothing had ever terrified him like that moment. He couldn't fix this. He couldn't buy time. All he could do was wait. Hours passed. The waiting room clock ticked louder with each second. Ethan sat there, his face buried in his hands, replaying every word he hadn't said. The last time he'd been in a hospital was the night Isabel and Liam died. He'd sworn he'd never set foot in one again. But Naomi had brought him back here. A nurse finally approached, her expression grave. "Mr. Lancaster, it's a placental abruption. She's lost a lot of blood. We're doing everything we can." His body went cold. "I need to see her. Sir. I need to see her." He pushed past the nurse, through the swinging doors, into the bright chaos of the delivery room. Naomi was pale, trembling, surrounded by machines. Her eyes flickered open when she heard his voice. "Ethan." He rushed to her side, grabbing her hand. "Don't talk. Just breathe, okay? They're helping you." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "If something happens, promise me you'll love the baby." "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't you dare talk like that." Her fingers tightened weakly around his. "You once told me love was a risk you couldn't afford, but Ethan, it's the only thing worth paying for." And then her hand went limp. The machines screamed. Doctors yelled. He was pulled back as they worked on her. "Naomi." Ethan shouted, voice breaking. "Naomi, please." But she didn't move. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Inside, time had frozen. Ethan fell to his knees in the hallway, his breath ragged, his world collapsing. He prayed, something he hadn't done in years. He begged. He promised everything. Just bring her back. Just this once. Then through the glass, he heard it, a faint, piercing cry. A baby's cry. And a voice shouting, "She's breathing. We've got her back." Ethan staggered to his feet, disbelief flooding him. He pressed his hands to the window, tears falling freely. Naomi was alive. The baby was alive. Hours later, when they finally let him in, the room was quiet. Naomi lay weak but awake, her hand resting gently on the tiny bundle beside her. Ethan approached slowly, almost afraid it wasn't real. She looked up and smiled, the softest, most exhausted smile he'd ever seen. "Meet your daughter," she whispered. He stared at the tiny face, so small, so perfect. His throat closed. She's everything," he said, voice breaking. Naomi reached up, touched his cheek. "So are you." He leaned forward, kissing her forehead. "You scared the hell out of me." "You needed it," she teased faintly. "You spend too much time trying to control everything." He laughed through tears. "Not anymore. Not with you." That night, as Naomi slept, Ethan held his daughter for the first time. Her fingers curled around one of his. He whispered, "You don't know it yet, little one, but you saved me too." Then he looked at Naomi, the woman who'd walked into his life for money and stayed for love. For the first time in years, he felt peace. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood before the same press that had once mocked him. But this time, he wasn't ashamed. He held Naomi's hand, their baby in her arms. "She's not my contract," he said firmly. "She's my choice. My love. My family." The world could write whatever headlines it wanted. Ethan Lancaster was done hiding. And Naomi, standing beside him, finally understood what love looked like when it wasn't bought or bargained, but earned. Later, as they walked home, the city lights reflected on wet pavement. Naomi looked up at him and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Ethan wrapped an arm around her. "How a deal became destiny." She laughed. "That sounds like one of your business quotes." He kissed her forehead. "No. That's my promise." If you were Naomi, would you have trusted Ethan again after his silence, or walked away before love had the chance to save you both? Do you think love born from a deal can become real, or is it doomed to fall apart? Drop your answer below. I'd love to read what you believe about love and redemption. 3 years later. The morning sun spilled through the wide windows of the Hamptons' home, soft golden light brushing over white curtains and the scent of sea salt in the air. A little girl's laughter echoed down the hall. "Daddy, come on. You're too slow." Ethan groaned dramatically from the doorway, wearing an apron covered in pancake batter. "Too slow? I've made 15 pancakes, young lady." Tiny feet pounded across the floor. "I want 16. Naomi's laughter carried from the kitchen, sweet and full. "You're spoiling her, Ethan." He grinned, flipping another pancake onto a plate. "That's the point." She leaned against the counter, her belly softly rounded again, another child on the way. Her eyes glowed, framed by sunlight. "You said that last time," she teased. "And I meant it." Their daughter, Isla Grace Lancaster, climbed onto a stool and beamed proudly at them both. "Mommy, Daddy says I'm his favorite girl." Naomi raised a brow. "Oh really? What about me?" Ethan chuckled, pulling her close. "You're my everything else." Naomi pretended to roll her eyes but smiled, that smile that still made him feel like the world stopped spinning for a moment. Later that day, Ethan drove them to the park, the same one Naomi used to walk through when she was broke and afraid, dreaming of better days. Now the same benches, the same oak trees, the same sky, but everything had changed. Isla chased butterflies while Naomi rested on a blanket beneath the shade, sketching quietly. Ethan watched her from a distance, how the sunlight kissed her skin, how peace had replaced the exhaustion in her eyes. She looked up and caught him staring. "What?" He smiled softly. "Just thinking how lucky I am." Naomi tilted her head. "Ethan Lancaster, the billionaire who used to say feelings were weaknesses, is talking about luck." He walked closer, kneeling in front of her. "I've had everything money could buy. But the only thing that ever made me rich is sitting right in front of me." Her eyes softened. "You always know what to say, don't you?" He kissed her hand. "Only because I learned from you." As the afternoon sun faded, Ethan spread out his arm, motioning to the ocean ahead. "Do you remember the night we met?" he asked. Naomi laughed quietly. "How could I forget? I was drowning in debt, desperate, and you walked in offering a deal that sounded like salvation and sin at once." He smiled at the memory. "And you looked at me like you could see right through my arrogance." "Because I did." He chuckled. "You still do." She reached for his face, her voice tender. "You're not the same man, Ethan. You're softer now. Kinder. You love without fear." He looked down, emotion tightening his throat. "I only learned because you stayed when I didn't deserve it." Naomi leaned her forehead against his. "You earned it, every day since." That night, after putting Isla to bed, they sat by the fire. Naomi held a cup of tea, Ethan an old photo, the one of Isabel and Liam. He placed it gently on the mantel beside a new one, Naomi and Isla, smiling in the garden. "I used to think keeping this photo hidden was loyalty," he said quietly. "But now I think they'd want to see what came after. They'd want to see peace." Naomi reached for his hand. "You've honored them by living again." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "By loving again." The wind outside whispered softly against the windows. Naomi rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the baby kick gently beneath her palm. Ethan placed his hand over hers. "Do you think we can ever really repay life for giving us a second chance?" She smiled. "We don't repay it. We just live it, fully, honestly together." He nodded, pressing a kiss to her hair. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Lancaster didn't feel the need to own anything. He just was. A husband. A father. A man finally free from the weight of his past. Years later, their home became filled with laughter, late-night story times, and tiny footsteps that never seemed to stop. Ethan often found himself pausing mid-work, just to listen, the sound of Naomi humming in the kitchen, Isla's giggles from the garden, and the gentle coo of their newborn son. He'd built empires. But this was his kingdom. And every time Naomi caught him smiling like that, she'd whisper, "See? You didn't just buy a future, Ethan. You built one." If love gave you a second chance, would you take it, even after heartbreak? Would you risk your peace for the person who feels like home? Tell us below, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Valentino Stories for more unforgettable love stories that remind us, Real wealth isn't what you have, it's who you have.